Hi everybody, it's Franny and we're back working on the Ferrari 308. In the last episode we got the suspension off the car and that was quite a job, but not too super difficult. All those parts have gone out, the shocks have gone out to California to be rebuilt, and the A-arms are at a local shop getting the bushings pushed out and replaced, and then they're also going to powder coat it as well. But that leaves us with a little bit of a slump here, and I thought it might be kind of fun to get to some of the other projects on the car. Alright, so you remember from the very first episode I showed you that the window regulators are really slow and the windows just go up and down. Oh, they just take their own time to get up and down. So the reason for that usually is that the grease that the factory put into the window regulators turns to kind of like this varnish over time and gets super duper thick, and the poor thing just can't turn. So what we're gonna have to do is pull the whole system apart, take it out, clean it, and reinstall it. But if you remember when we did this on the 911, it had sort of a scissor system that kind of lifts the window up and down. This is very different. This has an actual set of cable that runs all the way through a bunch of pulleys and everything. It's kind of a bit more complicated. We're going to be very careful with it. It's going to be very interesting to get this off and get it back on properly. All right, well, let's start by getting our door panel off. I just love these door panels. They're so elegant. This armrest here is just beautiful, the way it contrasts with the rest of the tan leather here, and then the stitching, and then down here, this is actually wool carpet. Just this cup here, just really beautiful. Love this thing. Okay, well, you're probably wondering, well, okay, but I see there's something missing. Where is the door release? Well, on these cars, the door release is actually up underneath this armrest. There's a little pull up here, and that's what releases the door. It's just beautiful. Our first step is going to be to get this armrest off, and there's a couple of bolts, and they're actually nuts, I think. There's some studs and some nuts, and there's a screw back here. Just a few different things we have to take off. But that's going to be our first step. Next, we don't want to forget to unscrew the actual door lock up here. We'll get that off. And the rest of this is pretty much just Phillips screws that are just screwed in, actually. And the panel just comes off as one piece. It's actually not that bad. One thing I do like about the panel is that it's made out of fiberglass, so it's actually quite strong. There's a block up here, so we'll pull that guy off. I've installed this insulating material. I thought it kind of helped to kind of keep the noise down a little bit. Our next step is going to be to remove the speaker, because that's actually where the regulator is going to come out, is through that speaker hole. Before we go too much further, I do want to take a look at this very carefully, take a lot of pictures and see what we've got. Here's our cable running through here, and there's a tensioner as well right here. We do have our window all the way up, so our next step is actually going to be to tape our window so there's no chance it can fall. But I want to take a look at all of this before we go too much further and just get a good idea of how this is routed and how it's going to work. It's very important as the cable crosses that the correct direction of it crosses on the inside as opposed to the outside, which is a little confusing. That'll make more sense when we put it back together. But my next step is just going to be to do some documentation on this, take a look at it, and make sure we know exactly how to put it all back together. Hopefully that will hold our window up. Once we remove the cable and everything, of course the window's going to want to slide back down, and we don't want that to happen because we need access back here for everything. The next thing I want to do is to loosen the tension on the cables, so we'll loosen up the tensioner here and drop it down a little bit. That way we can start getting the cable off the pulleys, and I think that's going to make it easier to get our regulator out. Just loosen this guy up. There we go. There we go, it's loose enough. All right, we've got our tensioner nice and loose here, so we can begin pulling the cable off. Now, we've already taken a bunch of pictures on this, so we're pretty certain we know which direction all this goes. This is for the cable going through, so it's very important that this cable that's going up to the right be on the outside of the cable that's going down to the right. So that's kind of an interesting thing. We'll leave that guy in there. That's kind of cool, huh? Take it off on the bottom. There we go. The cable is actually clamped onto the glass here. So we're going to want to loosen this up just to release our cable there, and then there's a pulley up above it. This This is Randy from the future. I could have made my life a lot easier if I had just lowered the window, I don't know, about 2 inches. That would have made getting the cable unclamped on both sides much easier. I did this on the driver's door after I got done with this one, and it made a huge difference. All right, well, that's our cable off to the top. That's great. Yay. So it's also clamped up here, so we'll have to loosen it up here. Well, we've got our cable disconnected from the window itself and off of all the pulleys, I believe. Next step is going to be to loosen up the actual regulator. There's 3 little 8mm nuts here. We'll go ahead and take those off. And the next trick is going to be to get it out through the speaker hole here. We also have our wires to separate as well. We've got a yellow one and a blue one. If we get these reversed, then the window will go up when it's supposed to go down and down when it's supposed to go up, and that's no good. But both wires on the other side are yellow. Since this one's blue, let's go ahead and put a little blue tape on this, and that way we'll know yellow against yellow, blue against blue. Take this little guy off. There we go. And yellow against yellow. Disconnect. And there we are, window regulator out of the car with a crazy cable and everything. Let's move to the workbench and go ahead and disassemble this. One thing that's very important to remember is just how the cable itself comes out of the spool here. The cable goes out, straddling this screw. It's the one that's on the opposite side of the motor. So that's one way to remember it. Let's take a look at our spool here. Of course, all the cabling is all loose here, but what's important, it's a little hard to see, but inside there are actual little slots in this wheel, and our cable needs to run in those slots when we're finished. All right, well, let's go ahead and disassemble this. It's important to remember that the parts on this are plastic, so when we go and clean this thing, we want to make sure our solvent won't dissolve plastic. All right, well, there's our grease. Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, there we go. So this is what the grease looks like. Look at this. Running the screwdriver over the top of the grease. Look at that. It's like glue. It's just, look at that. See this? This is it. This is what happens to these things. And this was nice soft glue at one point, but boy, it is just yuck. It's just mostly varnish. Look at that. Wow, huh? That's just terrible. We have it as well on our spool here, and it's just as bad. Look at that. That's really something, isn't it? I mean, that's supposed to be grease. That's not glue. We're not trying to glue this piece to this. This is grease. I was just... that is just crazy. Look at that. Holy cow. An X-Acto knife. Look at that. That's grease, or supposed to be at least. And it actually chips off. Isn't that crazy? Look at that. So that's nuts. Looking at the other side of this, we have a bent floppy washer under here. I'm sure that's just to provide a little bit of pressure on it. We just want to make sure that gets put back where it's supposed to be. We'll take that off. All right, and the way it was on is like this, like that. Now the way this works, there's a little shock absorber here. It just allows for a little bit of movement. There's a bushing here on the end and another block here. So we'll pull this one off, that in our tray. And we can pull this apart, I believe. It just sort of pulls apart. It's really just more like almost like a little harmonic balancer, little rubber guy. Glad to see it's in good shape. It looks good, actually. It's nice and soft too. And it's just this guy. And look at that, nice and soft. Okay, so that's good. That's really good news, actually. Now we have another one of these floppy washers on the other side here. Same deal, that it goes on like this, not like that. All right, so we just want to make sure that we get that on properly. So we'll take that guy off. What I read was that if you don't want to spend 4 hours cleaning it, then soak them in solvent overnight, and that way they'll be super soft in the morning and you can go at them with just a toothbrush and clean them up. Also a great opportunity to inspect the cable as well. So it was clamped on in a couple of places. It's clamped here. You can see it's kind of flattened there a little bit, but it's not broken in any way. They didn't over clamp it, so that's good. And the other clamp point looks like it's right here. Same deal, cable looks good. I think we're fine there. I've got some of this Jegs cleaner and degreaser is what I think I'm going to use. This is water soluble and breaks down in water. And it says it can be used on rubber and things, so I think it's going to be safe. I'll test a little spot of the plastic just to make sure it's happy. Go ahead and dunk the parts in this and let them sit overnight. All right, well, I'm going to let that soak overnight. I'll check it in about an hour. I think that's our best bet to get this incredibly hardened grease loosened up again. All right, well, I'll see you tomorrow. Well, it's been 24 hours. Let's see how our solvent did. I think it did a pretty good job, actually. All right, let's take a look here. The worst of it was here in this plastic housing. It certainly turned kind of a greenish color, which is a little weird. And look at that, it's coming right off. Yay. Oh, that's good. Boy, that makes things a lot easier. Oh my gosh, look at that. Well, it looks that worked pretty well. There's still a little bit of it here that's kind of a little bit stuck, but not too bad. Boy, that's really tough stuff, that grease. Holy cow. Well, now that we know that the solvent really worked pretty well, let me go ahead and get my actual parts cleaner and get that set up, and we'll get these parts completely clean. Several videos back, I put out the question, what do you guys use to clean your parts? Because I was pretty much using one of these plastic trays, trying to make it work, and it just wasn't very happening. So Heidi went out and got me this, and it's from Jegs, and it uses their Jegs fluid here. So I bought 2 gallons of it, and I filled this thing with one of them and then added a bit of water, so it's diluted a little bit, but it does a really good job. And it's what we soaked the parts in, of course, last night as well. So, but check this thing out. The only thing I did to it was to put a little bit of a restrictor in the flow here in this little snout, because it just was like too fast and kind of splattery. So I put a little restrictor in it. I think that really helped a lot. So that's about all the flow I think this thing really needs. It does too much and it just splatters all over the place, but it's nice to have a clean stream running through the whole time. All right, well, let's go ahead and get these parts cleaned. Well, I've cleaned and cleaned and cleaned it, so let's go ahead and start the reassembly. Reading online, a lot of people are using white lithium grease, and that's probably fine, although I think that with this worm gear and some of the stresses on this gear, I think it needs a little higher grease. And the reason why they're using a thinner grease is they just want to reduce the amount of drag on the system. And I get that. I totally get that. And maybe that's the correct way to go. I'm actually going to use a little bit of this red wheel bearing grease. And I think that pretty much that was about the weight that was in here originally. While I was reassembling this, I thought I would sort of start in bits here. And putting in this shaft, I noticed that these blocks were tight. They wouldn't go down all the way. They would sit up about there, and you could push them in really tight, but then they were really difficult to get out. Also, when I threw this in there like that, these would and laid these flat, because this metal plate has to go over the top of this, and it will hold these blocks in place. But this shaft would almost not turn. I mean, it was so stiff it would barely turn. And it was because of a misalignment of the 2 blocks. So what I did was I took a Dremel and ran it in here a little bit to smooth this out. This is almost exactly the right size. It's pretty much perfect. And ran it in and out here just to open this up, mostly at the bottom where it was tight. And now the blocks will sit in there just fine. And I had to do a little bit for the other side as well, not too bad. But with these blocks able to move around a little bit and sort of find their correct orientation, now when I put this thing in and lock them down, the shaft turns nicely. So this could also have been a contributing factor to why this poor thing was having so much trouble. But now it's nice and loose, looks great, and this is the way it goes together completely once we've got the actual spool in. And we should be able to turn this, and it should move very easily all the way through. Might be more helpful to put the this little guy on the end of it and spin it around, and just make sure that it's spinning through here just fine. It's easy enough to turn. And it's not binding anywhere. Well, I think that's all set. All we have to do is just lube it up and reassemble it. So we'll throw a little grease on these guys. It just doesn't take much at all. And that feels pretty good. And this really should spin very easily by itself. We don't want to forget our washer. It goes on this part of the shaft, which is going to fall into here. So we want to make sure that we've got that on there and greased. And of course in this hole as well and around here. Okay, like that. We'll have to lift up our worm gear a little bit to get this guy in. Here we go. Set all that back down again. Now there's a bit of pressure here from that washer, so that's going to make these blocks ride up a little bit. That's okay. Now we're going to want to get some grease on those gear teeth as well. Now we have this metal plate here that needs to go on like that. So it had to be over the cable here. This assembly is going to go on like this, but we have to wind our cable as well. There's a couple of things we have to do. We've got this piece here that goes on the end of this shaft like that, and then there's this rubber sort of a little cushion here. It needs to sit on here, and we're going to plug into that as we put this on. We have another washer here that goes here, so let's go ahead and get that greased up and put it on so we don't forget. Okay, at this point I'm going to put, I think it's about 4 turns on this is what we want. This is Franny from the future again. Now I did have some problems winding this spool, so I went back when I was doing the other side of the car and shot a little bit here that I think is a little clearer and a little more helpful. Here, check this out. We have one that starts on the top and one that starts on the bottom, and these can't cross in here. If they're crossed at all like that, then that's what causes the jam. So I think the best way to do it, since they both have to come out straddling this pin, I think the best way to do it is to look at one of them, like this one, and set it up so that it just doesn't have any turns on it at all, and then put all your turns on the other one. 1, 2, 3, and then one more, 4, that's right. And then straddling. That way we've got a smooth wind all the way around on our spool there. We can put this guy back on. Now it can get loose on the other side, it's fine. As long as the orientation is correct, it'll eventually right itself, but it'll never right itself if it's crossed. And just for good measure, we can clamp this here. There we go. I want everybody to sit down on their bosses. The metal plate has to sit down on the bosses. All right, we're split across here. All right, time to put some of our screws in, huh? Make sure the cable isn't pinched. Well, and that's our window regulator assembly back together. Pretty certain it's all back together correctly. I'll know more when I'm able to actually put power to it. If I put power to it right now, it's just gonna roll the cable in and out and kind of unwind everything, kind of make a mess, I think. I can work it a little bit by hand here, and it doesn't feel like it's binding at all. I want to get it in the car and get it strung back up. We won't hook it to the window just yet, but we will get it all strung up and then run the motor backwards and forwards and make sure everything's okay. All right, so our next step is to reinstall this thing back in the car. I have the window regulator here all ready to go. Got our wires tied up here at the top. It's just going to be the reverse of how we took it out. So up through that speaker hole, put this guy back in, hook up our power wires, and then we're going to reroute this cable all the way through all the different pulleys. And it's a little weird because you can't kind of see it here. I mean, there's a pulley up here, there's one down on the bottom here. This is our tensioner. So we're just going to follow the same pattern it was before. Once we get it installed and once we've got it through each one of the pulleys and get some tension on it, then we're going to run the motor back and forth a little bit, make sure that our wiring here is wiring properly on the spool and everything's okay. And if we can get it to run to both all the way down and all the way up extents, then we can run it all the way up and then attach it to our clamps that are up underneath there, and we should be good. Oh, one note I want to make is that, check this out. See, I put strapping tape up here because holy cow, this blue tape didn't hold anything. it's worthless. And the window just started to fall back down again. So this tape is much better, this strapping tape, and it's kind of holding the whole thing up. It's doing a pretty good job. Well, it actually goes with the motor up like this. So we've got this bolt up here, goes there. This one goes in this orientation here. The green dot is our spool and the blue dots are our pulleys. So we're going to start out at the top of the spool, head to that top pulley, and then we're going to go back down and a little bit forward to the bottom pulley, then diagonally all the way up to the top again to our top right pulley, then down to the bottom right pulley, and then up over our tensioner pulley. After that, the orientation of the cable is very important. I have that in yellow, so we'll be heading back to the spool, but we want to go under or towards the outside of the car for the first cross, and then towards the inside of the car for the second cross, and then back to the spool. Here's an actual photo of the inside of the door before I pulled the cables out originally. Now we're looking towards the hinges or towards the spool from the outside of the door. And we can see our yellow line there crosses behind towards the outside of the door first and then towards the inside of the door second. Okay, let's leave that like that. Now our tensioner is not quite as high as it was before we took all this apart. My guess is that it's not wound properly on the actual spool. So as we run it up and down, I think it'll be okay. I'm going to hook these wires back up. I've got the power on. Let's go ahead and run the window down since it's already in its full up state and see where we are. Okay, that's working pretty well. And our cable has gotten much looser here, which is good. So one of the things the factory did was to put a little bit of color here and here. And I know this is clamped here. So the clamp is actually up here for the window. It's right behind here, attached to the actual glass itself. And it literally runs down this cable all the way to the bottom. So this would pretty much be the window down all the way position. And when this is all the way up at the top, it's going to be the window up position. We'll go ahead and raise it back up a little bit. You can see our pink line here. And there's our crimp. Good. All right, that sounds really good, huh? Now that we have the wire on the spool properly and going in its little slots and everything, we're much looser down here, quite a bit looser actually. So let's go ahead and move our tensioner up. Pretty much our next step is going to be to clamp the wire onto the glass. Well, I think this is about the best we're going to get. It's probably at least twice as fast as it was before. There we go. Go and lower it all the way down. Goes down fast. Yay. And then back up. Now it's important to remember though that the car isn't running, so it's just running on the battery power, which is a volt or two low. So that'll help quite a bit when the car's actually running. But I think we'll go with that. Our next step is going to be to kind of tighten up our wires down here, put our covers back on, install our speaker, and then go ahead and put our entire door card back on and the armrest and everything, and we'll be done with this side. Yay! All right, the moment of truth here. That looks great. All right, back up. Okay, well, it's not going to win any speed contest, that's for sure, but it's at least twice as fast as it was before. And I know our motor is now clean and the whole mechanism is clean and everything's good in there. Another really good thing is it's the same speed as it's going up. It's not like slowing down a part of it and then speeding up. It was doing that before as well. So it was definitely binding on part of the run and it was kind of a mess. I think we're in really good shape here. From here, it's just a matter of doing the driver's side, which which is exactly the same, so I'm not going to bore you with that. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you got any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below and I'll get right to them. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that now because we've got lots more Ferrari content coming up. We've got some engine work we have to do and some exterior work, and of course we've got to put the suspension back together, and that'll be really interesting. All right, well, thank you so much for watching, and as always, a very special thank you to our Patreon supporters. Until next time, safe travels. Bye.